Some of their former members, whose descendants filled vacancies caused by death, and present members include Sir Mark Turner, Gerald Villiers, Samuel Montague, the Inchcapes, Keswicks, Peases, Schroeders, Airleys, Churchills, Frasers, Lazars, and Jardine Mathesons. The full list of members is presented elsewhere in this book. These people on the committee ordeered President Wilson to go to war against Germany in the First World War. This committee ordered Roosevelt to engineer the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor with the object of getting the United States into the Second World War. These people, this committee, ordered this nation to war in Korea, Vietnam, and the Persian Gulf. The plain truth is that the United States has fought in 5 wars this century for and on behalf of the infamous Committee of 300. It seems that, apart from just a few, no one has stopped to ask, why are we fighting these wars? The big drum of patriotism, martial music and waving flags and yellow ribbons, it seems, caused a great nation to become bereft of its senses. On the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, a new Hate Japan campaign is being waged, not by the Institute of Pacific Relations, IPR, but in the most direct and brazen manner by the Bush administration and the Congress. The object is the same as it was when Roosevelt inspired the attack on Pearl Harbor: paint the Japanese as aggressors and wage economic war, then ready our forces for the next phase, armed aggression against Japan. This is already in the works. It is only a matter of time before more of our sons and daughters are sent off to be slaughtered in the service of the feudal lords of the Committee of 300. We ought to shout from the housetops, "It is not for freedom nor for love of country that we are going to die, but for a system of tyranny that will shortly envelop the entire world." So tight is the grip of this organization on Britain that 95% of British citizens have, since the 1700s, been forced to accept as their share less than 20% of the national wealth of the country. This is what the oligarchical feudal lords of England like to call democracy. These nice, proper English gentlemen are, in reality, utterly ruthless. What they did in India, Sudan, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey will be repeated in every country under the New World Order One World Government. They will use every nation and its wealth to protect their privileged way of life. It is this class of British aristocracy whose fortunes are inextricably woven and intertwined with the drug trade, the gold, diamond and arms trades, banking, commerce and industry, oil, the news media and entertainment industry. Apart from the rank and file of the Labour Party, but not its leaders, the majority of British political leaders are descendants of titled families, the titles being hereditary and handed down from father to eldest son. This system ensures that no outsiders aspire to political power in England. Nevertheless, some aliens have been able to squeeze their way in. Take the case of Lord Halifax, former British ambassador to Washington, and the man who delivered Committee of 300 orders to our government during the Second World War. Halifax's son, Charles Wood, married a Miss Primrose, a blood relative of Lord Rothschild. Behind such names as Lord Swaithling is hidden the name of Montague, director of the Bank of England, and advisor and confidant of the majority stockholder of the Shell Oil Company, Queen Elizabeth II. All are members of the Committee of 300. Some of the old barriers have been broken down. Title is today not the only criteria for admission to the Club of Rome. It is appropriate to provide an overview of what the Committee of 300 hopes to achieve, what its aims and objectives are before we proceed to its vast, far-flung interlocking interfacing of banks, insurance companies, corporations, etc. The following information has taken years of investigative research to put together from hundreds of documents and sources of mine who gave me access to some of the papers in which the details are hidden. The Committee of 300 consists of certain individuals, specialists in their own fields, including cultus diabolicus, mind-altering drugs, and specialists in murder by poison, intelligence, banking, and every facet of commercial activity. It will be necessary to mention former members since deceased because of their former roles and because their places were given to family members of new members considered worthy of the honor. Included in the membership are the old families of the European black nobility, the American Eastern liberal establishment, in Freemason hierarchy and the Order of Skull and Bone, the Illuminati, or as it is known by the committee Moriah Conquering Wind, the Mumma Group, the National and World Council of Churches, the Circle of Initiates, the Nine Unknown Men, Lucis Trust, Jesuit liberation theologists, the Order of the Elders of Zion, the Nasi Princes, International Monetary Fund, IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, BIS, the United Nations, UN, the Central British Quater Coronati, Italian P2 Masonry, especially those in the Vatican hierarchy, the Central Intelligence Agency, Tavistock Institute selected personnel, various members of leading foundations and insurance companies named in the lists that follow, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, the Milner Group Roundtable, Cine Foundation, German Marshall Fund, Ditchley Foundation, NATO, Club of Rome, environmentalists, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, One World Government Church, Socialist International, Black Order, Thule Society, Annenherber Rosicrucianists, the Great Superior Ones, and literally hundreds of other organizations. What then are we looking at? A loosely knit gathering of people with weird ideas? Certainly not. In the Committee of 300, which has a 150-year history, we have some of the most brilliant intellects assembled to form a completely totalitarian, absolutely controlled new society, only it isn't new, having drawn most of its ideas from the clubs of Cultus Diabolicus. It strives toward a one-world government rather well described by one of its late members, H.G. Wells, in his work commissioned by the committee which Wells boldly called The Open Conspiracy, Plans for a World Revolution. It was a bold statement of intent, but not really so bold since nobody believed Wells except the great superior ones, the Annenherbers, and those who were what we would call insiders today. Here is an extract of what Wells proposed. The Open Conspiracy will appear first, I believe, as a conscious organization of intelligent and, in some cases, wealthy men, as a movement having distinct social and political aims, confessedly ignoring most of the existing apparatus of political control, or using it only as an incidental implement in the stages, a mere movement of a number of people in a certain direction, who will presently discover, with a sort of a surprise, the common object toward which they are all moving. In all sorts of ways, they will be influencing and controlling the ostensible government. Like George Orwell's 1984, Wells' account is a mass appeal for a one-world government. Summarized, the intent and purpose of the Committee of 300 is to bring to pass the following conditions: a one-world government and one-unit monetary system under permanent non-elected hereditary oligarchists who self-select from among their numbers in the form of a feudal system as it was in the Middle Ages. In this one-world entity, population will be limited by restrictions on the number of children per family, diseases, wars, famines, until 1 billion people who are useful to the ruling class in areas which will be strictly and clearly defined remain as the total world population. There will be no middle class, only rulers and servants. All laws will be uniform under a legal system of world courts practicing the same unified code of laws, backed up by a one-world government police force and a one-world unified military to enforce laws in all former countries where no national bound areas shall exist. The system will be on the basis of a welfare state. Those who are obedient and subservient to the one-world government will be rewarded with the means to live. Those who are rebellious will simply be starved to death or be declared outlaws, thus a target for anyone who wishes to kill them. Privately owned firearms or weapons of any kind will be prohibited. Only one religion will be allowed, and that will be in the form of a one-world government church, which has been in existence since 1920, as we shall see. Satanism, Luciferianism, and witchcraft shall he recognized as legitimate one-world government curricula with no private or church schools. All Christian churches have already been subverted, and Christianity will be a thing of the past in the one-world government. To induce a state where there is no individual freedom or any concept of liberty surviving, There shall be no such thing as republicanism, sovereignty, or rights residing with the people. National pride and racial identity shall be stamped out, and in the transition phase, it shall be subject to the severest penalties to even mention one's racial origin. Each person shall be fully indoctrinated that he or she is a creature of the one world government with an identification number clearly marked on their person so as to be readily accessible, which identifying number shall be in the master file of the NATO computer in Brussels, Belgium, subject to instant retrieval by any agency of the one world government at any time. The master files of the CIA, FBI, state and local police agencies, IRS, FEMA, Social Security shall be vastly expanded and form the basis of personal records of all individuals in the United States. Marriage shall be outlawed, and there shall be no family life as we know it. Children will be removed from their parents at an early age and brought up by wards as state property. Such an experiment was carried out in East Germany under Erich Honecker, when children were taken away from parents considered by the state to be disloyal citizens. Women will he degraded through the continued process of women's liberation movements. Free sex shall be mandatory. Failure to comply at least once by the age of 20 shall be punishable by severe reprisals against her person. Self-abortion shall be taught and practiced after 2 children are born to a woman. Such records shall be contained in the personal file of each woman in the One World Government's regional computers. If a woman falls pregnant after she has previously given birth to 2 children, she shall be forcibly removed to an abortion clinic for such an abortion and sterilization to be carried out. Pornography shall be promoted and be compulsory showing in every theater of cinema, including homosexual and lesbian pornography. The use of recreational drugs shall be compulsory, with each person allotted drug quotas which can be purchased at One World Government stores throughout the world. Mind control drugs will be expanded and usage become compulsory. Such mind control drugs shall be given in food and/or water supplies without the knowledge and/or consent of the people. Drug bars shall be set up, run by One World Government employees, where the slave class shall be able to spend their free time. In this manner, the non-elite masses will be reduced to the level and behavior of controlled animals with no will of their own and easily regimented and controlled. The economic system shall be based upon the ruling oligarch ethical class, allowing just enough foods and services to be produced to keep the mass slave labor camps going. All wealth shall be aggregated in the hands of the elite members of the Committee of 300. Each individual shall be indoctrinated to understand that he or she is totally dependent upon the state for survival. The world shall be ruled by Committee of 300 executive decrees, which become instant law. Boris Yeltsin is using Committee of 300 decrees to impose the committee's will on Russia as a trial run. Courts of punishment and not courts of justice shall exist. Industry is to be totally destroyed along with nuclear-powered energy systems. Only the Committee of 300 members and their elitists shall have the right to any of the Earth's resources. Agriculture shall be solely in the hands of the Committee of 300 with food production strictly controlled. As these measures begin to take effect, large populations in the cities shall be forcibly removed to remote areas, and those who refuse to go shall be exterminated in the manner of the One World Government experiment carried out by Pol Pot in Cambodia. Euthanasia for the terminally ill and the aged shall be compulsory. No cities shall be larger than a predetermined number as described in the work of Calgary. Essential workers will be moved to other cities if the one they are in becomes overpopulated. Other non-essential workers will be chosen at random and sent to underpopulated cities to fill quotas. At least 4 billion useless eaters shall be eliminated by the year 2050 by means of limited wars, organized epidemics of fatal rapid-acting diseases, and starvation. Energy, food, and water shall be kept at subsistence levels for the non-elite, starting with the white populations of Western Europe and North America, and then spreading to other races. The population of Canada, Western Europe, and the United States will be decimated more rapidly than on other continents, until the world's population reaches a manageable level of 1 billion, of which 500 million will consist of Chinese and Japanese races, selected because they are people who have been regimented for centuries and who are accustomed to obeying authority without question. From time to time, there shall be artificially contrived food and water shortages and medical care to remind the masses that their very existence depends on the goodwill of the Committee of 300. After the destruction of housing, auto, steel, and heavy goods industries, there shall he limited housing, and industries of any kind allowed to remain shall be under the direction of NATO's Club of Rome, as shall all scientific and space exploration development, limited to the elite under the control of the Committee of 300. Space weapons of all former nations shall be destroyed along with nuclear weapons. All essential and non-essential pharmaceutical products, doctors, dentists, and healthcare workers will be registered in the Central Computer Data Bank, and no medicine or medical care will he prescribed without express permission of regional controllers responsible for each city, town, and village. The United States will be flooded by peoples of alien cultures who will eventually overwhelm white America, people with no concept of what the United States Constitution stands for and who will, in consequence, do nothing to defend it, and in whose minds the concept of liberty and justice is so weak as to matter little. Food and shelter shall be the main concern. No central bank save the Bank of International Settlement and the World Bank shall be allowed to operate. Private banks will be outlawed. Remuneration for work performed shall be under a uniform predetermined scale throughout the one world government. There shall be no wage disputes allowed, nor any diversion from the standard uniform scales of pay laid down by the one world government. Those who break the law will be instantly executed. There shall be no cash or coinage in the hands of the non-elite. All transactions shall be carried out by means of a debit card, which shall bear the identification number of the holder. Any person who in any way infringes the rules and regulations of the Committee of 300 shall have the use of his or her card suspended for varying times according to the nature and severity of the infringement. Such persons will find, when they go to make purchases, that their card is blacklisted and they will not be able to obtain services of any kind. Attempts to trade old coins, that is to say silver coins of previous and now defunct nations, shall be treated as a capital crime subject to the death penalty. All such coinage shall be required to be surrendered within a given time, along with guns, rifles, explosives, and automobiles. Only the elite and one-world government high-ranking functionaries will be allowed private transport, weapons, coinage, and automobiles. If the offense is a serious one, the card will be seized at the checking point where it is presented. Thereafter, that person shall not be able to obtain food, water, shelter, and employment medical services, and shall be officially listed as an outlaw. Large bands of outlaws will thus be created, and they will live in regions that best afford subsistence, subject to being hunted down and shot on sight. Persons assisting outlaws in any way whatsoever shall likewise be shot. Outlaws who fail to surrender to the police or military after a declared period of time shall have a former family member selected at random to serve prison terms in their stead. Rival factions and groups such as Arabs and Jews and African tribes shall have differences magnified and allowed the wage wars of extermination against each other under the eyes of NATO and UN observers. The same tactics will be used in Central and South America. These wars of attrition shall take place before the takeover of the one world government, and shall be engineered on every continent where large groups of people with ethnic and religious differences live, such as the Sikhs, Muslim Pakistanis, and the Hindu Indians. Ethnic and religious differences shall be magnified and exacerbated, and violent conflict as a means of settling their differences shall be encouraged and fostered. All information services and print media shall be under the control of the one world government. Regular brainwashing control measures shall be passed off as entertainment in the manner in which it was practiced and became a fine art in the United States. Youths removed from disloyal parents shall receive special education designed to brutalize them. Youth of both sexes shall receive training to qualify as prison guards for the one world labor camp system. it is obvious from the foregoing that much work remains to be done before the dawning of the New World Order can occur. The Committee of 300 has long ago perfected plans to destabilize civilization as we know it, some of which plans were made known by Zbigniew Brzezinski in his classic work, The Technotronic Era, and the works of Aurelio Peccei, who founded the Club of Rome, especially in his book, The Chasm Ahead. In The Chasm Ahead, Peccei spelled out Committee of 300 plans to tame man, whom he called the enemy. Peccei quoted what Felix Dzerzhinsky once said to Sidney Reilly at the height of the Red Terror, when millions of Russians were being murdered. "Why should I concern myself with how many die? Even the Christian Bible says, what is man that God should be mindful of him? For me, men are nothing but a brain at one end and a shit factory at the other." It was from this brutish view of man that Emmanuel the Christ came to rescue the world. Sidney Reilly was the MI6 operative sent to watch over Dzerzhinsky's activities. Reilly was allegedly shot by his friend Felix while attempting to flee Russia. The elaborate plot was devised when certain members of the British Parliament raised a hue and cry and began to loudly demand an accounting of Reilly's activities in Russia, which threatened to expose the role of the Committee of 300 in gaining control of the Baku oil fields and its major role in assisting Lenin and Trotsky during the Bolshevik Revolution. Rather than have the truth dragged out of Reilly, MI6 thought it expedient to stage his death. Reilly lived out his days in utter luxury in a Russia villa usually reserved for the Bolshevik elite. Arguing that chaos would ensue unless the Atlantic Alley Ants, a euphemism for the Committee of 300 ruled post-industrial America, Peccei proposed a Malthusian triaging on a global scale. He envisioned a collision between the scientific, technological, military apparatus of the Soviet Union and the Western world. Thus, the Warsaw Pact countries were to be offered a convergence with the West in a one-world government to run global affairs on the foundations of crisis management and global planning. Events unfolding in what was formerly the USSR and the emergence of several independent states in a loose federation in Russia is exactly what was envisaged by Peccei and the Club of Rome, and this is clearly spelled out in both the books I have mentioned. A USSR thus divided will be easier to cope with than a strong, united Soviet nation. Plans that were laid down by the Committee of 300 for a one-world government, which included the prospect of a divided Russia, are now approaching a point of rapid escalation. Events in Russia at the close of 1991 are all the more dramatic when viewed against the 1960 long-range planning by the Committee of 300. In Western Europe, the people are working toward a federation of states within a one-government framework with a single currency. From there, the EEC system will be transferred bit by bit to the United States and Canada. The United Nations is benign, slowly but surely transformed into a rubber stamp of one-world government, with policies dictated to it by the United States, as we saw in the case of the Gulf War. Precisely the same thing is happening with the British Parliament. Discussion on Britain's participation in the Gulf War was kept to a ridiculously minimal level and belatedly took place only during a motion to adjourn the House. This has never happened before in the ancient history of Parliament, where so important a decision had to be made and so little time was allowed for discussion. One of the most noteworthy events in parliamentary history has gone virtually unnoticed. We are close to the point where the United States will send its military forces to settle any and all disputes brought before the United Nations. Departing Secretary General Pérez de Cuéllar, heavily laden with bribe money, was the most compliant UN leader in history in granting demands of the United States without discussion. His successor will be even more inclined to go along with whatever the U.S. government places before him. This is an important step along the road to a one-world government. The International Court of Justice at The Hague will be used in increasing measure in the next 2 years to settle legal arguments of all types. It is, of course, the prototype for a one-world government legal system that will supplant all others. As for central banks, essential in the planning of the New World Order, this is already very much a fait accompli with the Bank of International Settlements dominating the scene at the close of 1991. Private banks are fast disappearing in preparation for the Big Ten banks that will control banking the world over under the guidance of BIS and the IMF. Welfare states abound in Europe, and the United States is fast becoming the largest welfare state in the world. Once people come to depend on government for their subsistence, it will be very hard to wean them away from it, as we saw in the results of the last midterm election held in the United States, where 98% of incumbents were returned to Washington to enjoy the good life in spite of their utterly deplorable records. The abolition of privately owned firearms is already in force in 3/4 of the world. Only in the United States can the populace still own guns of all types, but that legal right is being chipped away at an alarming rate by local and state laws which violate the constitutional right of all citizens to bear arms. Private gun ownership will have become a thing of the past in the United States by the year 2010. Similarly, education is being eroded at an alarming rate. Private schools are being forced to close by a variety of legal stratagems and lack of funding. The standard of education in the United States has already sunk to such a deplorable level that today it can barely be classified as education at all. This is according to plan. As I described earlier, the one world government does not want our youth to be properly educated. Destruction of national identity proceeds apace. It is no longer a good thing to be patriotic unless it is in the cause of some one world government project such as the war of genocide being waged against the nation of Iraq or the impending destruction of Libya. Racial pride is now frowned upon and deemed to be an illegal act in many parts of the world, including the United States, Britain, Western Europe, and Canada, all countries having the largest concentrations of the white race. Led by the secret societies in America, destruction of Republican forms of government has proceeded apace since the close of WW II. A list of such governments destroyed by the U.S. is long, and it is difficult for the non-informed to accept that government of a country allegedly wedded to republicanism under a unique constitution would engage in such conduct, but the facts speak for themselves. This is a goal which was set over a century ago by the Committee of 300. The United States has led the attacks on such governments and continues to do so even as the United States Republican base is being steadily undermined. Starting with James Earl Carter's legal counsel, Lloyd Cutler, a committee of constitutional lawyers has been working to change the U.S. Congress into a non-representative parliamentary system. Work has been in progress since 1979 on the blueprint for such a change, and because of his devotion to the cause, Cutler was made a member of the Committee of 300. The final draft for a parliamentary type of government is to be presented to the Committee of 300 at the end of 1993. In the new parliamentary system, members will not be responsible to their constituents, but to parliamentary whips, and will vote the way they are told to vote. Thus, by judicial and bureaucratic subversion will the Constitution vanish, as will individual liberty. Pre-planned degrading of man through licentious sexual practices will be stepped up. New sexually degenerate cults are even now being set up by the British Crown, working through the SIS and MI6 services. As we already know, all cults operating in the world today are the product of British intelligence acting for the oligarchical rulers. We may think this phase of creating a whole new cult which specializes in sexual degenerate behavior is still far off, but my information is that it is due to be stepped up in 1992. By 1994, it will be quite commonplace to have live shows in the most prestigious clubs and places of entertainment. This type of entertainment is already in the process of having its image cleaned and brightened. Soon, the big names in Hollywood and the entertainment world will be recommending this or that club as a must for live sex shows. Lesbianism and homosexuality will not be featured. This new socially acceptable entertainment will consist of heterosexual displays and will be written up in reviews as one finds in today's newspapers about shows on Broadway or the latest hit movie. An unprecedented assault on moral values will go into high gear in 1992. Pornography will no longer be called pornography, but adult sex entertainment. Sloganeering will take the form of "why hide it when everybody does it?" Let's take away the image that public displays of sex are ugly and dirty. No more will those who care for this type of unbridled sexual lust have to go to seedy porno parlors. Instead, the upper-class supper clubs and places favored by the rich and famous will make public sexual displays a highly artistic form of entertainment. Worse yet, some church leaders will even recommend it. The voluminous, all-pervading, and enormous social psychiatry apparatus put in place by the Tavistock Institute and its huge web of related capabilities has been under the control of one single entity, and that entity is still in control as we enter 1992. That single entity, the conspirators' hierarchy, is called the Committee of 300. It is a power structure and a power center that operates far beyond the reach of any single world leader or any government, including the United States government and its presidents, as the late John F. Kennedy found out. The Kennedy murder was an operation of the Committee of 300, and we shall return to that. The Committee of 300 is the ultimate secret society made up of an untouchable ruling class, which includes the Queen of England, the Queen of the Netherlands, the Queen of Denmark, and the royal families of Europe. These aristocrats decided at the death of Queen Victoria, the matriarch of the Venetian Black Guelphs, that, in order to gain worldwide control, it would be necessary for its aristocratic members to go into business with the non-aristocratic but extremely powerful leaders of corporate business on a global scale, and so the doors to ultimate power were opened to what the Queen of England likes to refer to as the commoners. From my days in the intelligence business, I know that heads of foreign governments refer to this all-powerful body as the magicians. Stalin coined his own phrase to describe them, the dark forces, and President Eisenhower, who was never able to get beyond the Hofjuden, court Jew grade, referred to it in a colossal understatement as the military-industrial complex. Stalin kept the USSR heavily armed with conventional and nuclear forces because he did not trust what he called the family. His ingrained mistrust and fear of the Committee of 300 proved to be well-founded. Popular entertainment, especially the medium of movie-making, was used to bring discredit upon those who tried to warn of this most dangerous threat to individual liberty and freedom of mankind. Freedom is a God-given law which man has constantly sought to subvert and undermine. Yet the yearning for freedom by each individual is so great that up to now, no system has been able to tear that feeling from the heart of mad. The experiments that have gone on in the USSR, Britain, and the USA to blunt and dull man's yearnings for freedom have thus far proved to be unsuccessful. But with the coming of the New World Order One World Government, far-reaching experiments will be stepped up to drive man's God-given yearning for freedom out of his mind, body, and soul. What we are already experiencing is but nothing, a mere bagatelle, when compared with what is to come. Attacking the soul is the thrust of a host of experiments being readied, and I regret to say that institutions in the United States will play a leading role in the terrible experiments which have already been carried out on local small-scale levels at such places as Bethesda Naval Hospital and Vacaville Prison in California. The movies we have seen thus far include the James Bond series, the Assassination Bureau, the Matarese Circle, and so on. They were make-believe movies designed to hide the truth that such organizations do exist and on a far greater scale than even Hollywood's fertile idea men could dream up. Yet the Assassination Bureau is absolutely real. It exists in Europe and the United States solely to do the bidding of the Committee of 300 to carry out high-level assassinations where all other remedies have failed. It was Permindex which ran the Kennedy assassination under the direction of Sir William Stevenson, for years the Queen of England's #1 pest control operative. Clay Shaw, a contract agent of the CIA, ran Permindex out of the Trade Mart Center in New Orleans. Former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison came very close to cracking the Kennedy assassination plot up to the level of Clay Shaw until Garrison was dealt with, and Shaw was found not guilty of involvement in the Kennedy assassination plot. The fact that Shaw was eliminated in the manner of Jack Ruby, another CIA contract agent, both died of induced quick-acting cancer, speaks volumes that Garrison was on the right track. A second assassination bureau is located in Switzerland and was until recently run by a shadowy figure of whom no photographs existed after 1941. The operations were and probably still are financed by the Ultramare family, Swiss black nobility, owners of the Lombard Odier Bank of Geneva, a committee of 300 operation. The primary contact man was Jacques Soustelle, this according to U.S. Army G2 intelligence files. This group was also closely allied with Allen Dulles and Jean de Menil, an important member of the Committee of 300 and a very prominent name in the oil industry in Texas. Army G2 records show that the group was heavily involved in the arms trade in the Middle East, but more than that, the Assassination Bureau made no less than 30 attempts to assassinate General de Gaulle, in which Jacques Soustelle was directly involved. The same Soustelle was the contact man for the Sendero Luminosa Shining Pathway guerrilla group protecting the committee's Peruvian cocaine producers. When all of the best that the Assassination Bureau could do had failed, thanks to the excellent work done by DGSE, French intelligence formerly SDCE, the job was assigned to MI6, Military Intelligence Department 6, and also known as Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, under the code name Jackal. SDC employed clever young graduates and was not infiltrated by MI6 or the KGB to any measurable extent. Its record in tracking down foreign agents made it the envy of the secret services of every nation, and it was this group that followed Jackal to his final destination and then killed him before he could fire on General de Gaulle's motorcade.